I stood next to my wife of 10 years at her company gala, waiting to be introduced to her boss. Instead of saying, "This is my husband," she looked right through me and said, "This is Sean, just a friend from back home." She erased our marriage in 3 seconds to impress the man she was sleeping with. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just smiled and shook his hand. Because in my line of work, military intelligence and cybersecurity, you don't react to a breach with noise. You react with data. She thought I was a pushover. She didn't realize I had just decided to treat our marriage like a hostile operation. While she was playing house, I was building a dossier. Watch how I dismantled her entire life without raising my voice once. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton smelled like expensive orchids, seared scallops, and anxiety. To the untrained eye, the annual gala for Archon Global Systems was a celebration of fiscal year dominance. To me, it looked like a high-latency network off of forced handshakes and encrypted agendas. The lighting was amber and low, designed to flatter the board members and obscure the fact that everyone in the room was exhausted. I stood near a marble pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water I had no intention of drinking. In the United States Army, specifically during my time in signals intelligence, I learned that the most critical data is rarely in the transmission itself. It is in the metadata. It is in the silence between the bursts. I took that discipline from the sandbox of the Middle East into the glass towers of corporate cybersecurity governance. Now, I do not hunt insurgents. I hunt anomalies. I look for the shadow in the code, the unauthorized packet, the user behavior that deviates from the baseline. Tonight, the anomaly was my wife. Lauren looked magnificent. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that we had selected together, a garment that signaled elegance and upward mobility. She moved through the crowd with a kinetic fluidity, navigating the ecosystem of vice presidents and directors with the skill of a seasoned operator. I watched her from 10 feet away. This was her arena. As a senior project manager for Archon's most lucrative sector, she was the rising star. I was the accessory. I was the +1. The background process running quietly to ensure her stability. I was fine with that. I have never craved the spotlight. My job is to secure the perimeter, not to dance on the stage. "Sean," a voice drifted over. It was a polite, empty greeting from a marketing director, whose name I had deleted from my memory banks. I nodded, a tight mechanical acknowledgement, and turned my eyes back to the primary target. Lauren had stopped moving. She had entered the gravitational pull of Gavin Holt. Gavin was the chief revenue officer. He was a man built of polished veneers and aggressive confidence, the type of executive who treats the entire company like his personal hunting ground. He stood in the center of a circle of subordinates, holding a scotch like a scepter. When Lauren approached, the circle parted. It was a subtle movement, a shifting of physical space that signaled intimacy. I watched the body language. It was high-fidelity data. Lauren did not just stand near him. She leaned in. Her shoulders angled toward his chest. His hand lingered on her elbow for 3 seconds longer than corporate protocol or casual friendship dictated. It was a microaggression against our marriage, visible only to someone trained to spot the breach. I adjusted my tie and walked over. I did not rush. I moved with the steady, deliberate pace of a sentry walking a beat. As I approached the circle, the conversation died down. Gavin turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were cold, assessing, the look of a predator, calculating the nutritional value of a new threat. "And who do we have here?" Gavin asked. His voice was a rich baritone. Projected for the audience, he knew exactly who I was. We had met at the holiday party 6 months prior. This was a power play. He was forcing re-authentication. I waited for Lauren to speak. I waited for the standard introduction. "This is my husband, Sean." Lauren hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, perhaps 300 milliseconds. But in my world, that is an eternity. I saw the calculation behind her eyes. I saw the moment she weighed her public narrative against our private reality. She looked at Gavin. Then she looked at the floor. And finally, she looked past me, refusing to make eye contact. "This is Sean," Lauren said. Her voice was light, breathless, stripped of all weight. He's a friend from back home. He's staying in the city for a bit." The silence that followed was absolute. She hadn't just omitted my title. She had erased my clearance level. She had downgraded me from administrator to guest user in front of the man she was trying to impress. Gavin's smile widened. It was a shark's grin. He accepted the data packet without verification. "Ah, a friend from home. Good to have you, Sean. Welcome to the big leagues." He extended a hand. I looked at it. In that moment, the heat I expected, the red-hot flare of jealous rage, did not come. Instead, a sensation of absolute zero washed over me. It was the feeling of a catastrophic system failure, followed immediately by the kick-in of emergency backup power. My heart rate did not spike. It leveled out. My breathing became rhythmic. I was no longer a husband hurt by his wife's dismissal. I was an operator observing a hostile entity. I shook Gavin's hand. "Thank you, Gavin." My voice was flat, devoid of frequency modulation. I looked at Lauren. She was still refusing to meet my eyes. She was terrified, I realized. She was terrified that I would cause a scene, that I would break the polished veneer of her corporate theater. She expected me to fight for my territory. She expected the emotional outburst of a betrayed spouse. I denied her that satisfaction. "I will head to the bar," I said, my tone casual, as if I truly were just a stranger passing through her life. "I will let you get back to business." I saw the confusion flicker across her face. My compliance unnerved her more than resistance would have. She had expected a firewall. I gave her an open port. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I moved to the edge of the room, finding a vantage point in the shadows near the service entrance. I leaned against the wall and engaged in a full-spectrum scan of the room. I was not sulking. I was collecting. I watched who else in the circle had witnessed the erasure. There was the VP of Human Resources, a woman named Deborah, who had frowned slightly when Lauren spoke. Potential asset. There was Gavin's executive assistant, a young man who looked away in embarrassment. Weak link. I memorized their faces. I logged the time of the incident, 1942 hours. From across the room, I watched Lauren and Gavin laugh. He placed a hand on the small of her back. Possession established. She did not pull away. The marriage was over. I knew that with the certainty of a mathematical proof. The contract had been breached. But the operation was just beginning. They thought I was a ghost, a nobody, a piece of static in their signal. They did not understand that I was the system administrator, and I was about to start logging everything. The ride home from the gala was a masterclass in silence. Lauren stared out the window at the passing city lights of Atlanta, her reflection in the glass, looking ghostly and detached. She offered no explanation for the introduction, and I requested none. In the military, we call this radio silence. It is not an absence of activity. It is a tactical decision to mask movement. By the time we entered our house in the suburbs, I had already initiated the protocol. I did not scream. I did not throw my tie on the floor. I went into my home office, closed the door, and sat in the ergonomic mesh chair that supported my spine during 18-hour incident response shifts. I turned on my monitors. The blue light washed over my face, cool and familiar. In cybersecurity, you cannot detect an intrusion unless you first understand the baseline. You must know what normal looks like to identify the anomaly. For the last 3 years, the baseline of our marriage had been stable. Shared dinners, predictable work hours, weekend runs at Piedmont Park. But looking at the data now, I realized the deviation had started months ago. I had simply categorized it as career stress. That was a failure of analysis. I began the investigation not as a husband, but as a forensic analyst. I established the scope. I would only access data to which I had legal administrative rights, shared accounts, home network logs, public ledger information. I would not hack her private devices. I would not plant malware. I did not need to. People are sloppy. They believe that if they delete a text message, the event never happened. They forget that every digital action leaves a residue. I started with the calendar. We shared a digital family calendar for coordination. I pulled the archival data for the last 90 days and cross-referenced it with her verbal patterns. I noticed a recurring entry: late financed sync. It appeared on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always from 18 to 21 hours. The location was never specified. I correlated this with our joint credit card statements. The primary card, the one we used for household expenses, showed a decrease in activity during those windows. However, looking at the supplementary card issued in her name, I saw charges that did not align with a late office meeting. A ride-share transaction at 21:15 hours, originating from the West Side Provisions District, nowhere near her office. A charge for a boutique lingerie shop in Buckhead, processed on a Tuesday afternoon. I had never seen the merchandise. This was the exfiltration phase. She was diverting family resources to support a shadow operation. I moved to the home network logs. I am the administrator of our home Wi-Fi. Every device that connects to my router handshakes with my rules. I pulled the traffic logs for her iPhone. I noticed a pattern of encrypted packet bursts occurring late at night, usually after I had gone to bed. She was using a third-party messaging application, likely Signal or Telegram, that bypassed standard SMS logging. She thought she was being invisible. To me, the sudden spike in encrypted traffic was a signal flare. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I physically inspected her phone. It was lying face down on the nightstand, a new behavioral heuristic she had adopted recently. I did not try to unlock it. I did not need to see the content of the messages yet. I needed to test the access controls. I tapped the screen. The passcode had been changed. For 5 years, we had shared the same 6-digit code. Now, access denied. This was a hardening of the target. She was erecting firewalls. I left the phone exactly as I found it and went to the kitchen to brew coffee. My hands were steady. The pain was there, sitting in my chest, like a heavy stone. But I wrapped it in layers of logic. Emotion causes tunnel vision. I needed full-spectrum awareness. That afternoon, I deployed a passive monitoring technique using the cloud. We shared a cloud photo library, a feature she had likely forgotten to disable. I scrolled through the recent uploads. There were no incriminating photos of Gavin. She was too smart for that. But there were photos of herself. Selfies taken in bathroom mirrors I did not recognize. Food shots of dinners I did not attend. I downloaded the raw image files and opened them in an EXEF data viewer. The metadata told the story she could not. A photo she claimed was taken at her desk. Such much paperwork. Contained GPS coordinates corresponding to the St. Regis Hotel. The timestamp was 14:30 hours on, A Wednesday. I cross-referenced the St. Regis location with open-source intelligence on Gavin Holt. I checked his public LinkedIn and Twitter activity. On that same Wednesday, Gavin had posted a photo of a client strategy session with a blurred background. In the corner of his frame, resting on a marble table, was a distinct clutch purse. It was Lauren's purse. I had bought it for her birthday. The correlation was 100%. This was no longer a suspicion. It was a confirmed breach. But the final piece of the puzzle came when I analyzed the financial patterns more deeply. I looked at the reimbursement cycles. Lauren often complained about the lag time in corporate expense approval. I logged into our joint bank account and looked at the direct deposits. There were reimbursements from Archon Global Systems that matched the dates of the late finance syncs. My blood ran cold. It was not just that she was cheating. It was how they were funding it. They were charging their affair to the company. The dinners, the hotel rooms, the drinks, they were likely categorized under general ledger codes for client development. This was a critical escalation. Infidelity is a civil matter. It destroys a marriage. Expense fraud is a governance matter. It destroys a career. I realized then that I had discovered a persistence mechanism. Gavin was not just a lover. He was a threat actor leveraging corporate infrastructure to maintain access to my wife. They were stealing from the shareholders to subsidize their betrayal. I closed the laptop as the garage door opened. Lauren was home. I walked out to meet her, my face a mask of absolute neutral calm. I greeted her, took her bag, and asked about her day. She smiled, a tired, practiced smile, and told me she had been in meetings all afternoon. "Sounds exhausting," I said, my voice showing no trace of the data I now possessed. I had the baseline. I had the indicators of compromise. Now, I needed to build the case file that would dismantle them both. The data collection phase was complete. It was time to analyze the liability. In the intelligence community, we are taught that the smoking gun is a civilian myth. Real truth is rarely a single dramatic explosion. It is a convergence. It is the moment when independent data streams, signals intelligence, human intelligence, and financial forensics intersect at a single coordinate to form an undeniable reality. For me, that coordinate was a bistro in Midtown Atlanta called The Optimist. I did not go there to cause a scene. I went there to verify a hypothesis. Based on the calendar anomalies and the ride-share metadata I had harvested, I knew Gavin Holt had a vendor strategy lunch scheduled for 12:30 hours. I also knew my wife's Outlook calendar was blocked for private focus time. I watched from across the street, seated in my parked sedan, with the engine off and the windows tinted. At 12:45, Gavin's Audi pulled up to the valet. He stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket with that familiar, arrogant, preening motion. 2 minutes later, Lauren arrived, not in her own car, but in a luxury ride-share service billed to the corporate account I had tracked. They did not greet each other like colleagues, discussing quarterly projections. There was no handshake. Lauren stepped onto the sidewalk, and Gavin moved into her personal space immediately, his hand ghosting over her lower back. They entered the restaurant together. I did not need to see them eating oysters or drinking Chardonnay. I did not need to hear the whispered betrayals. I had visual confirmation of the asset meeting the threat actor. I snapped 3 photos with a telephoto lens, not for emotional catharsis, but for the timestamp and location data. Then, I drove away. The pain was a dull, rhythmic thrumming in my temples, but I pushed it down into a containment partition in my mind. I had to focus on the secondary layer of the investigation, the layer that would turn this from a divorce into a tactical takedown. Back at my home office, I opened the financial dossier I had been compiling. I cross-referenced the bistro location with Archon's expense policy. The Optimist was a sanctioned venue for client entertainment, but internal policy required a client to be present for any bill exceeding $300. I accessed the public vendor filings and the quarterly expense reports that were available on the company's internal governance portal. Documents accessible to any employee with my security clearance level. I found Gavin's past submissions. The pattern was glaring. Gavin was not just cheating on his wife. He was cheating the shareholders. He was categorizing these lunches as client development, listing phantom attendees from vendor companies. And here was the critical vulnerability. Lauren was the project manager associated with these vendors. She was not just a passive participant in the affair. She was the verification mechanism. She was likely validating the business purpose of these meetings in the project logs, creating the paper trail that allowed Gavin to bypass the automatic fraud detection filters. In the language of cybersecurity, she had become a compromised node. Gavin was the threat actor. She was the insider threat, facilitating his lateral movement through the company's finances. This changed the engagement rules entirely. If I simply exposed the affair, HR might slap their wrists or move them to different departments. Infidelity is messy, but in corporate America, it is often survivable if you generate enough revenue. But fraud is binary. Fraud is a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. It is a governance failure that triggers external audits, legal reviews, and immediate termination for cause. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating the dark room. I began to reframe the narrative. I was no longer a husband looking at his cheating wife. I was an incident response lead, looking at a corrupted system. Threat actor, Gavin Holt. Chief Revenue Officer. Compromised account, Lauren Peterson, Senior Project Manager. Affected systems, HR integrity, finance controls, vendor procurement, risk level, critical. I needed to inject this intelligence into the system without revealing the source. If I walked into the General Counsel's office now, I would look like a vindictive spouse. My credibility would be compromised by emotional bias. The system had to discover the error organically. I drafted a sterile, anonymous report. I did not use emotional language. I did not use the word affair. I focused strictly on the governance anomalies. Discrepancies noted in vendor entertainment allocation for Q3 and Q4. Cross-reference of attendees lists against building access logs suggests listed clients were not on premises during build hours. Pattern of recurring high-value expenses coincides with internal project block times rather than external client engagement. I attached the data tables, timestamps, expense codes, the ride-share receipts that coincided with the vendor lunches. I knew exactly where to send it. I had a contact in internal audit, a man named Marcus, who lived for compliance. He was a zero-trust believer, the kind of auditor who trusted numbers more than people. I sent the packet to his secure Dropbox using a routed non-attributable connection. I did not sign it. The data spoke for itself. But I did not stop there. An operation is not secure until you have defensive measures in place. I knew that once Marcus started asking questions, once the first subtle email went out from audit, asking for clarification on a receipt, Gavin would panic. A panicked target destroys evidence. So, I set the tripwires. I configured a set of alerts on the shared home network and the specific cloud folders where Lauren kept her backup files. I couldn't monitor the company servers directly, but I could monitor the reflection of their activity. I set up a script to ping me if Lauren attempted a mass deletion of her calendar history or if she suddenly tried to scrub her cloud photo archive. I also set a Google alert for Gavin's name regarding any sudden stock sales. If he caught wind of an investigation, he might try to liquidate equity before the termination. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the floor of my office. I felt a strange, cold tranquility. The dossier was built. The evidence was secured. The injection vector into the company's immune system had been executed. I heard the front door open downstairs. Lauren was home. "Sean," she called out. Her voice was cheerful, the practiced brightness of a woman who believes her cover is intact. I picked up Thai food on the way back. "Are you hungry?" I looked at the screen one last time, confirming the secure transfer to audit was complete. The trap was armed. The pressure was about to build, and they wouldn't know where it was coming from until the walls actually started to crack. "I will be right down," I called back. My voice was steady, calm, and completely hollow. I stood up and walked out of the office to eat dinner with the woman who was helping a thief steal from my future. I would sit across from her, break bread, and wait for the tripwire to snap. The most dangerous weapon in any operator's arsenal is not a rifle or a line of code. It is silence. In the weeks that followed the discovery, I turned our home in the suburbs into a psychological operations theater. But to Lauren, it just looked like domestic life. We ate breakfast together. I asked about her deadlines. I nodded when she complained about the unreasonable demands Gavin was placing on her team. A performance she put on to mask the reality of their afternoons at the St. Regis. To the untrained eye, I was the dutiful, slightly boring husband who had accepted his place in the background. Lauren mistook my quiet for weakness. It is a common error among narcissists. They assume that if you are not screaming, you are not processing. She believed I had accepted the disrespect at the gala, that I was beta enough to be managed. Gavin, arrogant in his executive tower, mistook my silence for submission. He thought he had successfully intimidated me with his handshake and his title. They were wrong. I wasn't submitting. I was calibrating. While they were getting careless, I was hardening the perimeter. I treated my exit strategy like a disaster recovery plan. Cold, redundant, and fail-safe. I took a half-day off work, logged as a dental appointment, and met with a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset dissolution. I didn't want a counselor. I wanted a tactician. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, and I laid out the metadata. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why she did it. I asked about asset tracing, spousal support adjudication in cases of proven infidelity, and the timeline for filing. We move quietly, the lawyer said, impressed by the dossier. We don't serve papers until the assets are secured. I spent the next 3 days air-gapping my finances. In cybersecurity, an air-gapped system is physically isolated from unsecured networks to prevent infection. I opened a new bank account at a completely different institution, one Lauren had no relationship with. I slowly migrated my direct deposits, citing a payroll system update if she ever asked. Which she didn't, because she was too busy managing her shadow life. I froze my credit reports. I inventoried every piece of marital property, photographing serial numbers of electronics, jewelry, and vehicles, uploading them to a secure cloud server she couldn't access. Then, I turned my attention back to the corporate battlefield. I needed to guide internal audit without revealing my hand. If I pushed too hard, I would look like a whistleblower with a grudge. I had to let the data lead them. I sent a second anonymous communication to the compliance portal. It wasn't a complaint, it was a risk flag. Recommendation: review T&E, travel and entertainment, spend against building access logs for the Strategic Accounts Division. Discrepancies may exist, between stated meeting locations and actual employee badging data. It was dry, boring, and utterly lethal. I knew Gavin's counter moves before he made them. Men like Gavin rely on gaslighting. If confronted, he would claim the expenses were pre-investment or off-the-books relationship building. He would try to intimidate the junior auditors. I prepared pre-bunking defenses. Pre-bunking is the proactive refutation of a narrative before it is even launched. I gathered the rideshare receipts that showed trips to hotels, not client offices. I archived the deleted items from the shared cloud that showed restaurant reservations for 2, not 4. I wasn't just building a case. I was removing their escape routes. 2 weeks into this Cold War, there was another company function. It was a launch party for a new software suite, held on a rooftop bar in Buckhead. The wind was brisk, cutting through the humidity. I attended, once again playing the role of the safe accessory. Lauren was emboldened now. The silence at home had convinced her that I was oblivious, a non-threat. She stood near the bar with a group of younger project managers and Gavin. I was standing near a heat lamp holding a ginger ale. When I heard it, "Is your husband joining the after party?" one of the associates asked. Lauren laughed. It was a dismissive, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like metal on glass. "Oh, God, no," she said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "Sean isn't really part of this life. He's very domestic. He wouldn't understand the vibe." She paused, then added the kill shot. "Honestly, we're more like roommates these days anyway." Gavin smirked, raising his glass to her. "To roommates," he said. The group laughed. I stood there 10 feet away and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no shame, just the cool, detached observation of a sniper adjusting for windage. She had just publicly disavowed the marriage to validate her affair. She had signaled to the pack that I was expendable. I let it happen. I let the disrespect hang in the air. I let them believe they were the apex predators on that rooftop. I checked my phone. I had a notification on my secure email app. It wasn't a work email. It was a signal from my contact in the governance division. A simple, pre-arranged code we had discussed on an encrypted channel. Subject: System Update Body. The patch has been approved. Deployment is scheduled for Monday, 9 volts. Translation: Internal audit had found the discrepancies. The board's audit committee had authorized a formal forensic review. They weren't just looking at receipts anymore. They were pulling the hard drives. They were interviewing the assistants. The investigation had moved from inquiry to active NITA operation. I looked up from my phone and saw Lauren across the rooftop, glowing in the ambient light, smiling at Gavin. She looked triumphant. She thought she was winning. She didn't realize that the ground beneath her feet had already been mined. I finished my ginger ale and placed the glass on a passing tray. I was ready to go home. I needed a good night's sleep. The trap was armed. The target was walking directly into the kill zone. And on Monday morning, the silence was going to end. The confrontation did not happen in our kitchen. There were no tears, no broken plates, and no screaming matches in the driveway. Those are the battlefields of amateurs who believe that emotion changes outcomes. I chose a battlefield where emotion is a liability and evidence is the only currency. Conference Room B, the fishbowl, on the 40th floor. It was Monday, 09 Igua hours. The audit committee meeting had been flagged as urgent internal control review. I arrived 5 minutes early. I wore my dark charcoal suit, the one I usually reserved for board presentations, and carried a single hardbound dossier. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, not at the head, but in the seat typically reserved for the external auditor, the seat of judgment. When the door opened, Gavin Holt walked in first. He was laughing at something the general counsel was saying, radiating the easy confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. Then he saw me. His step faltered, just for a microsecond. The laugh died in his throat, replaced by a flash of irritation. He checked his watch, assuming there was a scheduling error. "Sean," he said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into that patronizing tone he used at the gala. "I think you're in the wrong room, buddy. This is a closed session for the audit committee." Lauren walked in behind him. She froze. Her eyes darted from me to Gavin, and I saw the panic flare in her pupils. She looked pale. She knew. Somewhere deep in her lizard brain, she knew the silence of the last few weeks hadn't been peace. It had been the calm before the artillery barrage. "Actually," said Marcus, the head of internal audit, stepping in behind them and closing the door, "Mr. Peterson is here at my request. Please, sit down." The air in the room changed instantly. It went from a corporate meeting to a tribunal. Gavin took his seat slowly, his eyes locked on me. He wasn't scared yet. He was angry. He thought this was a desperate husband trying to air dirty laundry. "Look," Gavin started, leaning forward, deploying his executive presence like a shield. "If this is about personal matters, I'm going to stop you right there. This is a professional environment. We don't do domestic disputes here." "I agree," I said. My voice was calm, leveled, and completely devoid of vibration. "That is why I am not here to discuss my marriage. I am here to discuss a breakdown in vendor integrity, expense fraud, and significant governance exposure." Slid the dossier across the polished wood. It spun perfectly, stopping directly in front of the general counsel. "The subject of this review," I continued, speaking not to Gavin or Lauren, but to the lawyer, "is the misappropriation of approximately $45,000 in company funds over the last 3 quarters, utilized to facilitate a relationship between a senior executive and a direct report." Gavin's face turned a violent shade of red. "This is slander. I'll have you escorted out of this building." "It is not slander if it is documented in the ledger," I replied. I picked up the clicker for the projector. Slide 1. The screen behind me came alive. It wasn't a picture of them kissing. It was a spreadsheet. "On October 14th, I narrated, using my cold, operational voice, Mr. Holt submitted an expense for client development at the St. Regis Hotel, totaling $400. The stated purpose was a strategy lunch with the VP of Orion Tech." I clicked the remote. "This is the geolocation metadata from Lauren Peterson's corporate mobile device. Time-stamped October 14th. Same duration. She was at the St. Regis. The VP of Orion Tech, according to his own LinkedIn posts, was at a conference in Las Vegas." I clicked again. "This is a recurring pattern. 17 instances of overlapping geolocation data coinciding with expenses charged to vendor relations. No vendors were present. This constitutes a violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act regarding internal financial controls." Lauren finally spoke. She stood up, her hands trembling on the table. "Sean, stop it. You're being paranoid. You're stalking me. He's crazy." She turned to the general counsel, her voice rising in pitch, desperate to reframe the narrative. "He's just a jealous husband. He's just a stranger who doesn't know what he's talking about." She tried to use the gala insult against me. She tried to diminish me again. I didn't blink. I didn't look at her with hurt or anger. I looked at her like she was a line of corrupt code. "Miss Peterson," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria, "I am not analyzing your fidelity. I am analyzing your approval logs. You countersigned these expenses. You validated the false attendees. That makes you an accessory to fraud. This is not emotional. This is operational. Gavin slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You think you can come in here with some hacked phone records? I bring in $20 million a year for this company. You're a nobody. I will bury you. He stood up, towering over the table, trying to use physical intimidation. It was his last card. I remained seated. I didn't flinch. I let the silence hang for 3 seconds, the exact amount of time needed for his threat to echo in the room and be recorded by the stenographer. "Mr. Holt," I said softly, "you are laboring under the misconception that this is a negotiation. It is not. It is a notification." I pointed to the white speakerphone in the center of the table. The light was green. "We have the chair of the board and external counsel on the line. They have been listening for the last 10 minutes. Gavin froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a medical event. He looked at the speakerphone, then at Marcus, then at me. He realized finally the magnitude of his error. He had brought a knife to a drone strike. "This isn't a marital dispute, Gavin," I said, delivering the final payload. "This is a governance event. The artifacts have been preserved. The logs have been mirrored to the external audit firm. There is no version of this story you can delete." Gavin slumped back into his chair. He looked small. The polished executive, the man who owned the room at the gala, was gone. In his place was a liability. Lauren looked at me, tears streaming down her face, waiting for me to crack, waiting for me to show some sign of the man who used to love her. She wanted me to scream so she could call me crazy. She wanted me to cry so she could pity me. I gave her neither. I gathered my papers, tapped them on the table to straighten the edges, and stood up. "I have submitted my full report to compliance," I said to the General Counsel. "I believe my role here is concluded." I turned and walked toward the door. The room was deadly quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum, the sound of power changing hands. I didn't look back at my wife. I didn't look back at the man who tried to erase me. I walked out of the fishbowl and into the hallway, the sound of the door clicking shut behind me, sounding like the bolt of a rifle sliding home. The fallout was not a wave. It was a guillotine, fast, mechanical, and irreversible. In the corporate world, you can survive incompetence, and you can sometimes survive a scandal, but you cannot survive the audit trail. When the numbers don't add up, the system rejects you like a transplanted organ. Gavin Holt was not allowed to resign. There was no spending more time with family email sent to the company distribution list. At 14 hours on Tuesday, his network access was revoked. Security escorted him out of the building. I watched from the window of a conference room as he stood on the sidewalk, holding a cardboard box, looking at his phone, which I knew had already been remotely wiped by IT. The king of the ecosystem had been reduced to an unauthorized visitor. Lauren's collapse was quieter, but more total. Because she had signed the expense reports, she wasn't just a mistress, she was a co-conspirator. The investigation flagged her for gross misconduct. She was terminated effective immediately, with cause. That meant no severance, no references, and a permanent black mark in the industry databases. The career she had built her identity around, the status she had prioritized over our marriage, evaporated in 48 hours. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I simply executed the next phase of the protocol. 3 days later, I was in the house, packing the last of my things. The silence here was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last few weeks. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a space that is no longer a home. I moved with the same efficiency I used in the field. Clothes in the duffel, electronics in the hard case. documents in the satchel. The front door opened. Lauren. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had worn that midnight blue gown at the gala. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. Her eyes were swollen, and she wore sweatpants that seemed too big for her. The polished executive was gone. The arrogant wife was gone. All that remained was a frightened woman, standing in the wreckage of her own choices. She saw the boxes. She stopped, her hand gripping the doorframe, as if the ground were unstable. "Sean," she whispered. Her voice cracked. You're really leaving?" I zipped up my duffel bag. The sound was loud in the empty room. "The movers took the furniture this morning. The lease transfer is on the counter. You have 30 days before the landlord lists the property." She walked toward me, tears spilling over. She reached out, trying to grab my arm, trying to re-establish the physical connection she had severed months ago. "Sean, please, we can fix this. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But you can't just walk away from 10 years. We're a team. I love you." I stepped back, a smooth, calculated movement to maintain the perimeter. "You don't love me, Lauren," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, like I was explaining a weather report. "You love the safety I provided while you audited other options." "That's not true," she sobbed. "I made a mistake. Gavin, he manipulated me. He made me feel special, and I got lost. But it's over. Oh, he's gone. It's just us now. Remember us. Remember who I am?" I looked at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time in months, I felt absolutely no pain. The cooling process was complete. "At the gala," I said, "you introduced me as a friend from back home. You told your circle I was a stranger. You erased me because it was convenient for your narrative. I was panic-stricken. I didn't mean it. Intent is irrelevant. Only impact matters," I corrected her. "You defined the parameters of our relationship that night. You set the permissions. You wanted me to be a stranger." I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. "So, I am granting your request. I am a stranger. And strangers don't save you when your world burns down." She froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She saw it in my eyes. Not hate, not anger, but a total absence of recognition. The man who used to look at her with adoration had been overwritten. "Sean, please," she whispered, her voice fading into the emptiness of the room. I walked past her toward the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back for a final cinematic glance. I just opened it and stepped out into the cool evening air. As I walked to my car, I thought about the nature of security. In my line of work, we have a saying: trust is an access credential. You grant it to users you believe are verified. But betrayal? Betrayal is privilege escalation. It is when a user takes the access you gave them and uses it to compromise the system from the inside. When that happens, you don't negotiate. You don't try to patch the vulnerability while the attacker is still in the network. You revoke access. You terminate the session. It isn't cruelty. It isn't revenge. It is hygiene. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine hummed to life. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my lawyer confirming the divorce filing had been docketed. I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the house, the mortgage, and the memories in the rearview mirror. I drove toward the highway, watching the city lights of Atlanta rise in the distance. I was alone. I was starting over with a single suitcase and a bruised heart. But as I merged onto the interstate, accelerating into the flow of traffic, I realized something profound. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't the poor husband who got cheated on. I was the operator who had identified a breach, contained the threat, and successfully exfiltrated the asset. Myself, I heard the echo of Lauren's voice at that dinner one last time. This is just some guy I know. Nice to meet you, I whispered to the empty car. I signaled left, changed lanes, and didn't look back. The operation was closed. The log was cleared. I was finally offline. Focus on self-worth and dignity. In the end, Sean's story wasn't just about a corporate takedown or financial revenge. It was about the quiet power of self-respect. It teaches us that you don't have to scream to be heard, and you don't have to fight to keep someone who has already erased you. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is simply stop playing their game, revoke their access, and walk away with your dignity intact. You are the operator of your own life, and no one gets to stay in your circle unless they earn that clearance. What would you have done in Sean's shoes? Would you have exploded at that dinner party, or played the long game like he did? Let me know your strategy in the comments, and tell me which state or province you are watching from today. I love seeing how far our community reaches. If you found satisfaction in this story, please hit that subscribe button for secret lovers and click the next video on the screen for another incredible tale of betrayal and justice.